I'm watching a podcast episode of Jocko Willink in which he's interviewing General Sean McFarland, who is the general that he served under in Iraq, in Ramadi. And McFarland is an Army general. Jocko was a Navy SEAL, but I guess the SEALs were helping the Army and they were under the command of the Army there. And it's actually a super long, it's like a 6-hour podcast episode, which is the longest I've ever seen. But they're talking about all the stuff that went on over there. They're talking about people getting killed. They're talking about killing people. And I think they both acknowledge that the U.S. went into Iraq under false pretenses. But they're both military people, and they were there and they lived it. And so they don't entirely condemn what they did, which I think is understandable. But it's interesting just watching myself watch them, because I think probably up until the recent past, I would have listened to the podcast and felt a sense of envy at their military experience. And I just noticed for myself that this is like the first time I'm watching people in the military and not feeling that. And I think it's just because I've reached a point where I feel like certainly all the wars that the U.S. has fought since World War II have been unnecessary. And just where I'm thinking more about how unnecessary war is in general, and yet how good people are at waging it. But I think just some shift has occurred for me, and just not as enamored of the military as I used to be. And then another podcast I'm watching is with Tucker Carlson and Patrick Bet-David. And they're talking about a lot of interesting things. They're talking about the elections. They're talking about big power and corruption and how we're being duped and sickened by big pharma and all this kind of stuff. And it's really interesting to watch both episodes talking about essentially government being corrupt and making corrupt decisions and throwing people's lives away. Carlson and Bet-David are a little too enamored with Trump for my liking, but they're also both very smart individuals and very well-read, highly educated. I don't just mean like school-wise, just life-wise. They're aware of what's going on in a lot of different areas of life, and it's interesting to listen to them and see where I agree and see where I disagree. But it definitely feels like the things that they talk about sound like conspiracies, except that I hear this stuff talked about more and more often. and it's talked about by really smart people and successful people. These are not outcasts or people on the outskirts of life. Like, these are mainstream, really, like, people who are doing well. And so I wonder if we're on the verge of some kind of revolution where it's like more and more of this type of stuff, or government is messing with our lives, is being talked about and uncovered, and hopefully it leads to positive change. It's actually something RFK Jr. talks about a lot, and I am probably gonna end up voting for him. Trump is interesting. I mean, I just personally, I do not get a good feeling about him, and it's weird to hear so many people talk positively about him. And I kind of feel like I'm being gaslighted, because I just, I haven't come to that conclusion. And I also think a lot of it is in comparison to Biden, who is terrible. And so it's easy to see anybody as being more positive than him. So generally, it just feels like we're swimming in a swamp of corruption on all sides, left and right. And depending on where you look, there's so much information out there that, first of all, it's hard to tell what's real and what's not. And then there are definitely people trying to manipulate information to force us to think certain things. But also, I think there are just so many voices that not all of them are fake. At least, some of them are seeking the truth. And maybe to some extent, it's getting easier to find that as well. Maybe it's hard because of all the information out there to determine whether what you found is the truth or not. But it's easier to find all different types of viewpoints, and I hope that over time we'll get better at determining what's true and what isn't.